At the outbreak of World War I in August 1914, Canada had no military air service. Canadians joined the British Royal Flying Corps, or Royal Naval Air Service, to fly in that terrible conflict. In the air war in France, the Canadian pilots showed great skill in flying and shooting. And in early 1918, the Canadian government called for a Canadian Air Force of 8 squadrons to join the fight. But the British did not want to release veteran Canadian pilots, and only 2 CAF squadrons were formed. The First World War ended in November 1918. In 1920, when 2 CAF squadrons were finally sent home to Canada, their government authorized a new temporary CAF with 1,300 officers and 3,900 airmen. They flew donated British and American aircraft and took over a vacant British training station in Ontario. In the 1920s and 30s, CAF pilots flew mapping missions and forest and fishery surveys, patrolled for forest fires and smugglers, and charted airmail routes and long-distance air routes. By British royal decree, the CAF became the Royal Canadian Air Force on April 1, 1924. That date now considered the birth date of the RCAF. On that day, the RCAF officially became a permanent part of Canada's defense forces. At the start of World War II, the RCAF had just 209 aircraft, mostly obsolete, and just 4,000 personnel. But it also had a large pool of civilian pilots and government-sponsored flying clubs. Canada quickly mobilized to expand and equip its Air Force. Both Britain and Australia sent air cadets to Canada for flight training by the RCAF. By the end of the war, the RCAF was the 4th largest air force in the world, with 250,000 men and women.
I put my foot locker in the back of the airplane, and I took 2 co-pilots I'd been training to be a pilot on the B-25, and I had led Spitfires, 6 of them, into Palermo, Sicily. And when I got there, I said, "Fellas, you're on your own." And I took my foot locker out of the airplane, and I asked someone on the line to take me over in a Jeep to the colonel's office. And boy, he put his arms around me and he said, "Oh, I've been hoping this day would come." And he said, "I've told all of the people in this fighter group about your expertise." And he said, "I want you to put on a show for all of them." And so he brought all the 3 squadrons were located in different places into Palermo. He got everybody assembled and he said, "You're going to see something you've never seen before. But I want you to know one thing. If I catch any one of these you fighter pilots trying to duplicate what you're going to witness, I'm going to have you grounded."
During World War II, more than 100 Canadians flew fighters in the Battle of Britain. Canadians made up 1/3 of the bomber crews in the RAF. The B-24 Liberators of the RCAF Coastal Command shepherded Allied convoys across the North Atlantic, and women served in the RCAF as nurses, clerks, and ferry pilots. The Korean conflict saw more than 800 RCAF personnel serving as fighter or transport pilots and flight nurses, and in supply, technical, and intelligence roles. A few Canadian air pilots flew as forward air controllers with the U.S. Air Force. Today, as the RCAF celebrates its 100th birthday, it is a fully modern and highly capable air wing involved in defense and conflicts around the world.
Watch out for the prop. Yep. Dave, go ahead. Rusty.
Thank you.
Joe and Dave. All right, grab your seats. All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed McElhenney. You've seen me here before. I'll be here some more. And thanks for being here to honor our brothers to the north. As you can tell, we've got a variety of airplanes here today. We're going to run out of time. I'll tell you that flat out. You can see we've got a wonderful Tiger Moth right here. We got a Hurricane, we got a Spitfire, and then way in the back there, you might recognize that as a P-51, but it's in a little different colors. The gentlemen that we have here represent all those airplanes, and they are just loaded with history of these airplanes and also of the Royal Canadian Air Force. We're here to celebrate that 100th anniversary. I'm here to say I'm honored to do it. That the Canadians have been our blood brothers forever, and they fought in every war with us, and with some tremendous airplanes. But not to put these guys aside. There's another individual who, you've already seen him briefly, Luckadoo, who I had the honor of interviewing 2 years ago, I want to say. And Lucky is here just as a quote cameo. He can't be here, but we've got him up on the video screen for everybody to see, and he's going to participate a little bit. And we told him, we said, hey, we've got these Canadians, and we've got the Spits here, and we've got the Hurricanes, and Lucky has some Canadian stories, if you will. And again, because we're going to run out of time, we're not going to be able to talk to Lucky quite as much as we'd like to. But Lucky is up there right now. And Lucky, I got to say hi. Yeah, we've already said hi before. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for your service. Wish you could be here in person, but we're concentrating this year on the Canadians, and we're concentrating on some of the Canadian airplanes that flew. And I'll open it up to you and just say, what's your, I could go to your very first story, which was, and if you all didn't know, Lucky wanted to join the Royal Canadian Air Force way back when. Is that right, Lucky?
It is. When I graduated from flying school, my best friend and I wanted to join the Royal Canadian Air Force and get our wings. And then once America became involved in the war over Europe, that we would transfer to the American forces. Okay, and if y'all didn't know, Lucky was a B-17 pilot. He ended up over in England, a member of the Bloody 100th, as you might remember. He's one of the survivors. He was over there, got his missions, and unfortunately, that buddy of his that tried to join up with the Royal Canadian Air Force did indeed join, and he passed away while he was over there in an aircraft accident. But Lucky was, and if you haven't seen it yet, I'll say now, Masters of the Air. It's the history. I think it's on what channels? That
That's Apple Plus.
Apple, okay. Great series. Yeah, he knows. And yeah, that depicts what Lucky's group did while he was over there. But Lucky, I got to ask first, in specific to the Spitfire, what kind of opinions do you have of that airplane? Was it, did you see him very much? Did they help you guys out?
Well, actually, we saw them very little because when we arrived in England in June, the 1st of June of 1943, the Spitfires and the Hurricanes, of course, had just come through the Battle of Britain against the Luftwaffe, and they were licking their wounds and recovering from that onslaught. But because we were going out in broad daylight in mass formation, supposedly with fighter escort, there were no fighters that could escort us. The Spitfires and the Hurricanes that the RAF furnished us as escorts barely got us to the enemy coast. All of Europe was occupied at that time. And the minute we crossed the coast, we were over enemy territory, and that's when they had to turn back and go back and refuel.
Okay, and so they did help you out somewhat, but then what made the difference? There's another airplane down at the end here that when it came to be, it helped you out a lot more, didn't it?
Well, eventually we did get some P-47s, Thunderbolts, and some P-51s of the 9th Air Force who would perform escort duties for us, because that was the strategy, was that we would have fighter escort. But what was overlooked was that the fighters were twice as fast as the bombers, and as a consequence, the fighters had to constantly orbit our formation and burn up fuel, and so they couldn't last very long.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you for that insight. And indeed, the Hurricanes and the Spitfires are the guys who basically protected Britain during the Battle of Britain there, and that the Spits escorted you as far as they could. Then the P-51s took over after that. And yeah, basically, hey, helped us win the war. So thank you. I'll say that for right now. I'll give you another. You got any other Spitfire or Hurricane stories you want to tell?
Well, when my good friend who was going to join the RAF or the RCAF with me and did, because he got parental consent and I didn't. He went through the Battle of Egypt and North Africa, and eventually was based back in England by the time Pearl Harbor occurred. And I went through my training and got based in England, and we got together there, and he flew his Spitfire up to my base one day. And I put him in a B-17 and took him up and put him in the pilot's seat. And he said, "Buster, this ain't flying. You ain't nothing but a truck driver." And I said, "Well, Sully, we need truck drivers too." And he said, "Well, let's land and you fly my Spit and you'll know what flying is all about." And I said, "No, that would be stupid and foolish and I'd kill myself." And he said, "No, it's a piece of cake." But he talked me into doing that. And I actually flew a Spit one time, very gingerly, around my base, and managed to get it back on the ground without cracking it up and killing myself. But it was a very foolish thing to do. But it did give me a taste of what fighter pilots who had all the fun got to do when they were escorting us.
So you got about 20 minutes of Spitfire time in your career, huh?
or less, yes.
All right, Lucky, thank you very much. Thank you so much for being part of this presentation.
Well, you're quite welcome. I'm happy to be there with you, even remotely, and wish everybody at Oshkosh the very best.
All right, thank you, and please stay healthy. We love to see you. Thank you.
Thank you.
He's 102.
All right, folks, that's something special. I'll tell you that right now. You're not going to see that very often and anywhere else, most likely. But now I'll get to our honored guests here. And you can see we got 4 guys here, and we got 4 airplanes. Well, each guy is kind of associated with the airplane. I'll introduce each one. I'm not going to get into their history because we got too much to talk about. Dave Hatfield's the first guy right here. He's going to be doing some talking. Joe Cosmano, and he's associated with which airplane?
The Hurricane.
There's a little rivalry here, if you can't tell. But anyway, Joe Cosmano has got the Hurricane side of things. Rusty has got this yellow airplane over here. And Dave at the end has got the P-51. And we're just going to, if there are some questions about the P-51, that'll probably be at the end. The concentration is going to be, hey, the 100 years of the Royal Canadian Air Force, starting out kind of with, hey, the Tiger Moth, transitioning to the Hurricane, talking a little bit about the Spitfire. And these guys are going to be walking around the airplanes and pointing things out. We'll open it up to questions at the end, probably for about, 10 minutes or so. But hopefully we won't be pressed too much. And we got way too many Mustangs rounding over here. Come on. But anyway, that's where we're going to go. And so I'm going to open this with Dave and just say, okay, a brief history now of why we're here, what we're doing, and talk about the process, I guess is the best way to put it.
So, yeah, my name's Dave Hadfield. I'm chief pilot of the Mike Potter Aircraft Collection, and we're based near Ottawa, Canada, just across the river in Gatineau, Quebec. And Mike Potter has, over the last 20, 25 years, put together a major historical flying collection, just because he thinks that it needed to be done. Very much a private initiative on his part. So I joined quite a few years ago. This is my 20th year as a volunteer, and I was recruited because I had Tiger Moth time, and they had just bought one. So they said, would you come and show us what we needed to know? And I've never left. So I've been a volunteer every year, and it's led to a wonderful set of opportunities.
And you fly a little bit of everything too, right?
I have, yeah. Last year I did the first test flights on our brand newly restored Hawker Hurricane. And sure, I fly the different airplanes, but it's not wise to jump from one to another because they're all a little different, right? So I've been flying the Spitfire mostly for the last few years.
Should I ask what's your favorite?
Well, that depends on the job. I was here in 2018 with the Spitfire and showed it to the crowd and all that sort of thing. And then I carried on to the west coast of Canada. So it was a cross-continent trip, 5,000 miles in a Spitfire, which is a short-range interceptor, right? Would have been way easier in the Mustang, right? But we were at Geneseo last week, and sometimes there's mud on that grass airfield. And that's where the Hurricane is best. It'll go through a mud puddle, no problem. Spitfire will go over on its nose. Yeah. So they all have strong points. And my favorite would be depending on the task.
Okay, let's get into the specifics now a little bit. Okay, and the history. Spitfire is the glory airplane. That's the one that everybody sees. Everybody won the Battle of Britain. But what's the truth? Weren't there more Hurricanes involved there than Spitfires? And give us a little bit of a background in that regard.
Yes, I don't want to steal Joe's thunder here, but...
well, we can pass it to him anytime.
Well, let's go back to the 30s. They needed an airplane that can keep up with the bombers. The bombers were going faster than the fighters in the day. So they put out an order saying, we want an airplane to go 300 miles an hour at 10,000 feet. Well, they didn't have one. They put on the drawing board the Hurricane, which ended up being very innovative for its time. retractable landing gear, an enclosed cockpit, guns in the wings where the pilot couldn't touch them. It exceeded the 300 miles an hour at 10,000 feet. So this was a revolutionary airplane for its time. One other thing is the Spitfire and the Hurricane were on the drawing boards pretty much at the same time, but the two camps never really coordinated. If you really take a look at the airplanes, the thickness of the wing of the Hurricane, the thin wing of the Spitfire, totally different. This is old rag and tube type construction where a steel tube in the inside surrounded by wood covered with fabric. The Spitfire is a monocoque construction where the steel, the aluminum skin actually adds to the structure.
Yeah,
So
take
it's-
a look. I mean, folks, you can tell. I mean, this wing is a big, thick wing. You know, that one. Take a look at it. A big difference between the two.
Big difference between
Yep.
the two. Guns in the wings, that was unheard of. Closed cockpit.
Yep.
Comfort for the pilot.
Yep.
Retractable landing gear.
Yep.
You know, they were putting in hydraulic systems and things that had never been applied to the airplanes before.
How about the fuselage? Take a look at it. You can see. Believe it. How much wood is in this airplane?
Not a lot of wood. The wood is just kind of like the stringers
Right.
that create the shape.
Yep.
But if you look behind here, there's truss-type steel tubing,
Yeah.
which makes the strength.
Yeah.
The original Hurricanes did come out with fabric-covered wings,
Okay.
and then they changed them and made them metallized.
Okay.
The control surfaces are still fabric, because they believed back then it was important to do that. So, very revolutionary airplane for 1935, and also there were more of these in the Battle of Britain, more operational squadrons than the Spitfires, and the airplane had a substantial success rate at the Battle of Britain by being that way.
How about armament? How did it compare to the Spitfire in terms of what it
Well,
was able to?
that was evolved over time. You can see on this airplane, there were 4 .303 caliber guns here and 2 more here. That's 6 on each one. This is the Mark 12.
Okay.
The Mark 4 Hurricane had 2 20-millimeter cannons, which stick out like that one on the Spitfire wing. Now, when they went into Africa and going after tanks, they literally put pods on the bottom of the wing with 40-millimeter cannons. They had about 18 rounds of cannon fire, but they left a couple guns, machine guns, so they could come in, use the machine gun, oh, I'm on target, then bump, bump, there goes the tank.
Yeah. Wow. All right, and now we get into the Spitfire a little bit more and go, okay, was that a slight step up, and it was in terms of what it brought in terms of speed, and Dave, you can talk to that.
Yeah, as Joe said, the Spitfire and the Hurricane were on the drawing board at the same time. But the Hurricane was an evolution of existing technology, right? If you look at a biplane like the Hawker Fury or the Hart or the Hind, they're built very much the same as the Hurricane. They just have 2 wings. Mm-hmm. So you didn't have to develop a new training system or train a new workforce. The Spitfire was completely different. It's monocoque. And that wasn't a normal way to build things in England. It's built, like a Cessna or an RV or something like that. So they had to both construct a major factory to mass produce them and then come up with a workforce. So it was difficult to bring the Spitfire into mass production until, 2 years later. And that's why, one of the main reasons why the Hurricane was more numerous in the Battle of Britain.
How about engines? Compare the engines.
Engines were the same in the Battle of Britain initially. They were early Merlins. They're at that time, they were both Rolls-Royce Merlins with single-stage superchargers, like single impeller wheels of about 1,000 horsepower. But of course, the Merlins evolved over time. All the Hurricanes stayed with single-stage supercharger versions in the Hurricane of the Merlin. The Spitfire went on to get the same engine as the Mustang with a 2-stage impeller, the 60 series Merlin, which allowed it to go high and fast. Many different models of the Spitfire, and they evolved in different families. They were still building the Mark 9 in January 1945. That's when that Spitfire was built. At the same time, they were producing Griffin engine Spitfires, which have a lot more power.
Talk about where they're built. Did Canada build any? Yeah.
Well, the Hurricane was built in Canada. This one was built in Canada in 1942.
Okay.
So, yes, they brought the plans over. They did. One thing I want to make sure, it was the Merlin engine made it to the Mustang that really made the Mustang. It wasn't the Merlin going to the Spitfire. It went to the Mustang, which changed its performance tremendously.
Let's bring Dave in here. So we're a 3-ship formation, and Dave, flying the Merlin in the Mustang, has to figure out power settings and speeds. Just talk about that for a sec, Dave.
Well, the Mustang, it came out a little bit later. It was designed, and the first production happened in 1941. Ours is a 1944 that started out as a P-51D, like most of the ones you see out here. But in 47, it was modified to a RCAF Mark IV, which is the configuration that we have it in now. The Mustang was a revolutionary design in the wing, because if you look at the big fat wing, even though the Spitfire looks sleek, it's still a turbulent airfoil, where the Mustang was one of the first laminar flow wings, very more efficient, did a lot more faster at high speed, high altitude. What that does for us and the team is I have to slow down. I'm probably the lowest time Mustang guy here. I have the privilege of starting to fly the Mustang last year, and I have 90% of my hours in the Mustang with flaps down. The flaps on the Mustang they're amazing. You can drop 10 degrees flaps at over 400 miles an hour. It's like a speed brake. What's the flap speed in the Hurricane?
Oh, 120 miles an hour.
Miles an hour, yeah.
So quit showing off, okay?
Yeah, so I fly. One of these days, I'm just going to go out and fly that thing with flaps up to see what it's like to actually fly a Mustang fast. But
all right, let's go back in time now. Yeah. I want to bring Rusty into this. And this is a guy who's got, I don't know how many hours he's got in these things. I just asked him beforehand, I said, hey, I heard a rumor that he flew one of these things from the West Coast to the East Coast. He said,
yeah,
yes,
that was more than a rumor. That was a painful fact.
So I'll let Rusty talk a little bit about, hey, this airplane and some of the differences. Originally they were built in England, and then Canada said, hey, that's not going to hack the program.
And of course, the real focus is we talked a lot about the end product, the airplanes that fought the fight and won the war. But without pilots, they're just static display. They wouldn't have done anything. So at the same time as they were producing airplanes, they had to produce pilots, and competent pilots. And the Tiger Moth was a big part of that. In the United States, we had the Stearman that everybody associates with training. In Canada, the Commonwealth countries, United Kingdom, they had the Tiger Moth. Now, there are some differences. England doesn't get as cold as Canada does, apparently. So the Canadians put a canopy on it. And for those of you that look at that canopy and say, maybe it's not the most attractive feature of the plane, I can tell you it's nowhere near as ugly from the inside looking out as it is the outside looking in. The Canadians, in addition to the canopy, put heat in. What a novel idea. A biplane that has heat coming off of the exhaust and dumped in so that you can survive your winter training. Canada actually took the early Tiger Moth and made these changes to it and built about 1,700 or so in Canada. This airplane was built about 10 days and flown about 10 days before Pearl Harbor, and it stayed in active training command use throughout the war, and was then demobbed, sent off to some military flying clubs, civil ownership, and came to the U.S. in '99. Larry Kelly, who's got the B-25 Panchito here.
Is he here?
There's Larry.
There he is.
Yeah. So the great thing apparently about owning a B-25 and having it in a hangar is you've got a lot of room underneath it for other airplanes. So he's got a couple of Tiger Moths, he's got a couple of Chipmunks, and I get the opportunity to fly them on occasions. So I was going to talk about, a lot of people heard of the English Tiger Moth? Raise your hand. Yeah, anybody flown in some? There you go. Aren't they great? Yeah, landing, isn't the landing great? Yeah, this one's not. The Canadians put brakes on theirs, and in fear of it tipping over on its nose, they moved the main mounts about 10 inches forward. And what that did was change the angle of attack ever so slightly for when you're sitting in a three-point attitude, which makes it a little harder to judge that exactly right. So I quickly learned that wheel landings are the way to go on this. Flying it, brought it from Delaware. It was 14 hours of flying and 9 fuel stops. The good news today is you don't have to land in 400 feet. You can take 1,000, so wheel landings are great.
Tell them about how did you engage the brakes on this airplane? A lot of people probably don't know how the brakes are engaged. So you're used to toe brakes or heel brakes or whatever.
Yeah, so the British solved this easily. They just didn't have brakes. They had a tail skid and no brakes. So they've got a lever, a Johnson bar, that you pull part way back, and then you get differential braking with pedal. And that sounds fairly straightforward, except occasionally you want to use the throttle and the rudder to help steer, and your left hand's occupied, so you put a right hand on the throttle. And tail dragger pilots, a few of you, yeah, where do you hold the stick when you're taxiing? Back. How do you do that with both hands? So you end up holding it with your arm, and it's worse than chewing gum and walking at the same time. And the really scary thing is after about 5 hours, you get used to it. And then if you think about it, you realize that's just wrong. But they use the same system on the Chipmunk. The difference here is these are mechanical. So the combination of the mechanical brakes, the forward landing gear, the most difficult thing on this airplane really is a landing and taxiing in a crosswind. Other than that, it's a great trainer. I think it probably fed very well into the Spitfire and to the Hurricane in terms of teaching pilots how to deal with and react to these situations, and to let them not just take off and fight and shoot down other airplanes, but to land and have an airplane that's usable the next day. So not much else that I'll drag on about this. Happy to answer questions later. The only other thing I'll say that I didn't realize till I flew it, the ignition switches are on the outside of the airplane. And that just seems peculiar until you realize they didn't have starters. The ground crew were hand propping from this side, and all they have to do is look up and see if the switch is hot or not. And it's brilliant, because anybody that's propped an airplane, you've always got in the back of your mind the fear that the pilot didn't do what they said they would do and go cold on the mags or hot. So the Brits didn't trust their pilots, I guess, nor did the Canadians, and they could check.
Okay, cruise speed, you took it from the West Coast to the East Coast. How many stops?
Oh, good God, I don't know. It's 75 miles an hour.
Okay.
And I fly about an hour and 45 minutes, maybe 2. And the challenge with the cross country and a low performance, limited endurance plane really are figuring out where your fuel stops have to be. If you fly across southern Arizona, your options are limited. So you got to find a place that you can get to. Sometimes you land a little early to take on gas because you can't go any further. But I love doing it. I hate to say that. I've flown an L4 Cub here a couple times. I've flown my Chipmunk here. I've flown the Tiger Moth. Apparently, I've found my niche, which is not fast and not high.
Okay, one other question. How about oil consumption on this airplane?
This one's pretty good.
Okay, what's it's all relative. I understand that. So what's pretty good on this airplane?
Pretty good. I put a quart of oil in mostly at every fuel stop, so about an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours. One of the other ones I brought back over, the engine was nearing the end of some maintenance phase, and that one I was stopping for oil more frequently than I put in gas when I stopped for oil.
Okay.
But if you think about it, it's an inverted engine, so the oil has to go down into the cylinder heads. It doesn't scavenge it back out, so the oil that drips down through the pushrod tubes builds up. Eventually, it goes overboard. But they did that for a reason, because by flipping the engine over, they raised the propeller up high. The Gypsy Moth that Dave has flown is the other way around, which means the gear is much taller, the airplane's taller, center gravity's taller. So this is really nice. It gives you the ground clearance, but the price you pay is it's just going to drop oil out the bottom. And you can see, this thing, all the guys that take airplanes and put flat engines on them to get easy power, they're losing that field of view. I love flying behind a inline engine. They're just a hoot because you can see where you're going.
And if y'all didn't know, that's the fuel tank right there. And how much fuel does it hold?
Well, it's 19 imperial gallons, and that translates to something in U.S. gallons that I'm not exactly sure of, something more.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it burns per hour?
About 7.8. Coming out here was just a little under 8 gallons an hour, 7.8.
Okay.
At 1,900 RPMs and 75 miles an hour indicated.
Okay.
Yeah. The cars are getting damn quick, by the way, if you look at the interstate on the way.
It's when you can't pass a school bus and it's stopping every once in a while.
You got to wait for a hill.
Hey, quit fighting, you guys, okay? Like I said, there's a little rivalry here. I want to get into the Hurricane a little bit more. Race and restoration, if you get a chance, look at this thing up close because it is absolutely gorgeous. But in terms of flying it, what do you think? Easy, hard? I mean, and you've flown a variety of these airplanes also. I just need an opinion, Do you enjoy it?
Yes, I do. Obviously, a high-performance fighter aircraft, each one of these airplanes, no matter which one you look at, and he talked about the different systems. You have to go back into a mind frame of the 1930s. They didn't know how to put the hydraulics in where you just flip a switch and lights and everything worked. They designed it not so much for a pilot operation, but just the functionality of the airplane. How do I like flying? If you've ever flown a J3 Cub, who's flown a Cub here? Okay? Sitting in the front seat, you're way up there like that, right? Well, that's how this airplane is in the Hurricane. Compared to, say, a P-40, where you're sitting back there, you feel like you're in a lounger chair. So there is a different feel for each of these airplanes, and they have a different way of their systems working. So what's important is to learn the systems, get that in your head so you could operate the airplane efficiently. Yeah. For example, the takeoff. All right, here you are. You're all set to go. You're at the end of the runway. You have your stick right here. Okay, that's good. Your aileron's elevated, and you got your hand on the throttle. Okay, let's go. Well, first you fight the P factor and the torque of the engine. You're going down the runway. This is great. Now you're in the air. You're happy. Well, now you got to get the landing gear up. Well, now you got to take this hand, put it here, take there, fly in the airplane. Now you're flying back right over here. Okay, make sure you put this lever in the right place. Stick it up. Oh, did you forget to do the little safety latch? Oh, no, I got the safety latch. All right, now you're looking for the green light. Well, wait a second. Wait, all right. Oh, somebody forgot to tighten the throttle friction lock. So when you switch your hands, all of a sudden, engine failure. No, the throttle's just coming back. All right, push it back up. Now, how the hell am I going to tighten that? That's not what I'm trying to do. Is the gear up? Is the gear down? If the gear doesn't come up, now you're going to overheat.
We just think you look cool, though. You look cool, okay?
So every time you watch a Hurricane takeoff on videos, when you see the plane go in the air and you see it doing one of these numbers, that's because the guy's doing one of these numbers in the cockpit. And on top of that, you're trying to follow somebody in there. Where'd he go?
Okay, I got it. Go ahead.
And the gear lever is also the flap lever.
Yeah, you remember the old time, it's called an H-gate. It's like 4 in the floor. Up and to the left is up. Down and to the left is gear, up and down. Now you just go over in the center, up and down is flaps up, flaps down. Well, that's great. Well, you're taxiing back in and you want to raise your flaps. You better make sure it's over there in gear 3 and 4. It's awful embarrassing.
Like I said, these guys are a wealth of information. All right, let's get into the Spitfire a little bit. Flying the Spitfire, nuances, stuff you need to watch out for.
The Spitfire is a wonderfully precise instrument. It reacts to everything you do. The controls are, they give you total control of the airplane's attitude at all phases of flight. And once you get used to that, it's an absolute delight. It's almost neutral in pitch stability and has very light elevator, but that means you can pull as much G or put the airplane wherever you want to just with fingertips. And when you're coming in for landing, for example, I generally have to remind myself, take my fist off the spade grip, which is the top of the stick, and go back to my fingertips so I can three-point it with some finesse. And when it comes to air show performances and things like that, you have both speed, acceleration, and control. So it's a delight to fly. As in the case of these two aircraft, you have to speak British, right? It's different than speaking American, and I say that coming from the P-40 and the Mustang. Very different mindsets. Both good, but different engineering streams and different expectations. But you pick up on that. In terms of performance, it's midway in terms of speed between the Hurricane and the Mustang, and it's also a short-range airplane most of the time if it's unmodified, right? Hurricane and Spitfire are designed to take off, climb up fast, shoot something, come back down and land, and that's it. We modified our Spitfire to have 4 little bladder tanks in the gun bays so that we can get an extra hour of fuel, and that's a big bonus for someone like me operating it. Oh, there's so much I can tell you about the Spitfire.
It's all about the Hurricane today.
Oh, it's all about the Hurricane.
Yeah, I will. The Hurricane was the unsung hero, I think, in the Battle of Britain. Really, I mean, and it was very successful against some high-performance German fighters out there. I mean, it was shooting down 109s, and why was that successful? Was it better pilots?
No, I wouldn't say that, but every airplane has its optimum fighting altitude, speeds, and whatnot. So training the pilots and what it could do and what it couldn't do and how it could outturn, not turn, whatever, is the key to success. Obviously, there are more of them in the Battle of Britain than there were Spitfires, but using the airplane in its optimum environment gives it its success. Well, and even modern day fighters, you know all the different, they have graphs that show you, hey, if you can bring them from 10,000 to 8,000, that's your best altitude for getting a tighter turn where you could outturn an ME-109. ME-109s had an inverted system, so they could roll inverted and still keep the, whereas these airplanes, they couldn't do that. They go inverted, negative G, they lose their power because of the carburetor. So there's all sorts of these little things that you incorporate in your head for the air combat of the airplane.
How about G loadings on these things? Similar? For combat, how many Gs could they pull in that thing?
Until the rivets pop.
Okay.
They didn't have G meters. They didn't have G limits.
Okay.
So if anybody was, in a life or death situation, they would pull to the limits of the stall or to the maneuverability of the airplane. And if there was a wrinkle on the skin of the wing or rivets popping out when they landed, well, get a new airplane.
How about speed? Hey, you put this thing in a dive, and how was there a danger there? I mean, there were some airplanes, you'd have difficulty pulling out. Was that something a factor if you dumped the nose over and accelerated?
Some airplanes, yes, and the Spitfire and the Hurricane, we don't fly them at the vertical with power on type speeds at all. We only get up to in the high 300s to do loops and things like that. But again, if you have a 19 or 20-year-old who's in a life or death fight, they don't care about engine longevity. They don't care about manufacturer's suggested limitations on the engine. Yep. They don't care about the Air Ministry handbook. They've either got to accelerate and shoot somebody or avoid getting shot. So they would go right to their own physical limits and the physical limits of the structure of the airplane.
Okay, and the engines fairly reliable most of the time. How about you guys now?
So there's a good story about that, and the Rolls-Royce Merlin, which was so instrumental or even pivotal in victory in Europe, started out as a private venture. The Air Ministry, the government at the time, had no interest in it, but the people at Rolls-Royce figured. They could hear the jackboots across the channel and in Europe, and they knew that what the country needed was a 1,000 horsepower engine for about 1,000 pounds of weight with a slim front for excel. And so it was called the Private Venture 12. The PV-12 was its first name. And initially, the Merlin was not reliable at all. And in the first airplane it was in, the Ferry Battle, had all kinds of engine failures back in the days of the Merlin 3 and, the very, very earliest models. But Rolls-Royce, even though it didn't pay, very much to their credit, took engines, ran them to destruction, took them apart, figured out what broke, and improved the engine again and again and again. So that by the time of the Battle of Britain, the young pilots had to worry about tactics and survivability and all that sort of thing. They didn't have to worry about the engine.
And what's interesting, I've read an article where they were walking down the beach one day, and they actually took a stick and kind of went on the sand, and, well, if we did this and we do this, let's design that engine. And both of these airplanes are based around that narrow engine, whereas in the day, they were big round engines, the radial engines of the day. So this was and it won the Snyder Trophy.
Yep.
With that, and that was pivotal in promoting this engine and developing it more.
Okay, how about, great motor, but it needs to stay cool. You guys have cooling problems when you're on the ground?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Not the Mustang.
I know.
Yeah, if you look at the three aircraft, you see the difference between the Spitfire and the Hurricane, right? The radiator in the Hurricane is directly behind the prop, so it cools on the ground, but the Spitfire doesn't. So it's not too bad on a cold start. I've got about 15 minutes before the temperature comes up to the boiling point. Mm-hmm. If the coolant temperature gets up to about 120, you got to shut down right where you are, no matter what. Otherwise, you're generating an engine overhaul. So,
that engine overhaul is a $4 gasket. But you have to pull the engine and grind it down. That's the $20,000 to replace the warp.
Understand.
Yeah, or more. But anyway, so the Spitfire, I'm okay on the first launch of the day. But after you land, all the heat comes out of the engine into that coolant, and then it's not being cooled by the radiators anymore because they're not in the slipstream. And I get about 5 minutes at the most. And then I shut down. So I really have to be careful if I'm planning a multi-leg day in the Spitfire. But the Mustang, can no problem. Hurricane, pretty much the same.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna stop here now. We've got, I don't know, about 7 minutes or so, and I'm gonna open it up to questions because I'm sure there's a lot of people here who've got questions about these airplanes. So where are my mic? There we go. My mic people are here, and we'll open it up to questions, and then we'll come back to you guys to see if we missed anything, so we can finish it up. So okay, first question. Go ahead.
Question on the stick. The British have that loop, and the Mustang, of course, has the single hand grip. If you've flown both, which one do you prefer and why?
That's interesting because, for example, the Mustang, Dave said when he checked out on it, it's awkward. You can't get the stick all the way to the right because your leg's in the way. But the Spitfire and the Hurricane have an articulated stick, so it comes up, and then there's a joint, and only the top part rotates. So you can get full aileron and doesn't hit your leg. But here's another thing. You can, with the spade grip at the top, you can rotate your hand around. You can rotate your hand around and pull it hard to the right. And when you're moving that, you can use your wrist in a way that you can't with a stick. So that's kind of a subtle difference. I prefer the spade grip. And the other thing is that's where they mount the brake lever. Right?
Okay, I'll give you that.
You need to realize who you're talking to also. One of those silver airplanes out there he owns and flies. In fact, I think I've flown with him before, as a matter of fact. Yes, I have. Okay. So, Wes, thank you very much for the question. Good to see you. All right, other questions? I know we got them. There's one right there.
Yeah, did they actually transition from this Tiger Moth to the Hurricane with nothing in between?
No. They went through the Harvard.
The Harvard next,
which
is like a T6, an AT6, okay? So, yeah, Tiger Moth, AT6, and then, and these things over here.
Yeah, so one of the things about the Tiger Moth and why it was useful is that it's actually slightly difficult to fly. Yep. At the same time they picked the Tiger, they could have picked a J3 Cub, but they didn't because they wanted to select people and get rid of the ones who weren't well suited, who weren't going to make it to the top. A Tiger Moth has the characteristic of exaggerating your mistakes without killing you, most of the time anyway. So this was very much a selection aircraft as well as a trainer, but it's the Harvard or T6 that set the bar. It's a complicated airplane, wants to ground loop, and they wanted to know that if someone got their wings through flying a T6 Harvard, they were reliable, and after that, it was just conversion courses to the other airplanes.
So what we're saying is Rusty is a really good pilot here. Rusty is a for flying this thing.
No, I just make small mistakes.
There you go. That's it. All right, I see another question up here. Go ahead.
Hi, so you mentioned with the Hurricane and Spitfire, the armaments changed throughout the war. But specific to the 303 machine gun, how effective was it against shooting down other aircraft? One, because it's a small round than the 50 caliber or the 20 millimeter. But I do know that prior to the war, there were reports by the RAF kind of like questioning how effective the 303 would be against more heavily protected German aircraft.
I guess the best way to describe that is if you ever go to some of the museums, they sometimes will have a piece of aluminum skin, say, and they demonstrate the hole. Well, the 303 makes a little hole like this. The 50 cal makes a bigger hole. The 20 millimeter cannon explodes. The difference between machine guns and cannon. The cannon has an explosive round. So there is a tremendous difference in the damage that the bullets can do when they graduated to bigger size. The Mark IV Hurricane had 4 20 millimeter cannons, much more effective, you could say, than the 303s.
Well, and this turned into a real fighter bomber per se.
Yes, it did.
In the African War. I mean, go ahead. You can.
It served in every theater of the war, and it was one of the few planes that ever served from the beginning of the war, 1939, all the way to the end of the war. And one of the other interesting things about the construction, we talked about the steel tubing in there. It's not welded. They didn't have welding machines back then like we do nowadays. So every joint in the tube structures in there is put together with nuts, bolts, spacers, washers, and there can be as many as 42 in a very simple joint. So it could go to different theaters of the war in primitive areas where they didn't have electricity, all that, and they could still fix them.
Okay. Next, I know there's one up there.
Yeah, Dave, on the P-51, you mentioned that started out as a P-51D, and it was converted to, I think you said, a Mark IV Canadian. Could you go over highlight some of the differences between the P-51D and the Mark IV?
We're having trouble hearing you. Hold on here. Wait for this helicopter to go by.
What were some of the things they changed from the D model to convert it?
Laurent's here. He's the guy that keeps me safe in the Mustang. He knows this better. It's mostly cockpit stuff. The only thing external that I do know is different from the Canadian model is the fresh air intake for the cockpit fresh air is integrated just above the oil underneath the airplane. It gives me 2 air blows on each side, and that's a godsend. The other thing is it's mostly cockpit stuff with respect to where the oxygen system is, where the cockpit lights are, and stuff like that.
Cold weather starting. There were a number of changes for, de-icings, that sort of thing, yeah.
Who owns all these airplanes?
Michael Potter.
The whole thing, everyone.
Yes,
Okay.
He's a philanthropist in Ottawa and a pilot. He's got more Spitfire time than I do by far. And it's interesting, he was a businessman, did well, was a pilot on the side, did what everybody dreams of doing when he had enough resources. He bought a Spitfire. This is about the year 2000. And every place he took that Spitfire, just landing for gas or a cheeseburger or something, became a media event. Right? People coming out all across the airfield, phone ringing, grandfathers bringing their grandkids out, and I did this, I saw these helped me. And he was overwhelmed by the response. And so he just decided to do more of that. He felt there was a need, and a private citizen who had the resources, it was a good thing for them to do. So he built up an organization, which most of us joined long ago, and that's our mandate. That's why we're here.
And I've got a different shirt because I'm flying an airplane owned by someone else. And that's Larry Kelly and the Delaware Aviation Museum. Yep. Best known for Panchito, the really
B-25
shinier
Panchito.
than any B-25 ever out here. And similar thing, the an individual who really is passionate about the warbird work and willing to share with others, and expanded to include some, smaller airplanes in the fleet, which is grand.
That's part of our logo up here, history and heritage, right there, and that's what we're doing out here. All right. Any other questions? There's a question up there. Go ahead.
So I know we spoke briefly to the transition that the pilots would have done in World War II, but obviously we know they did it within tens of hours, and as pilots who did a similar transition over more towards hundreds of hours, do you have any particular insight to those guys doing it back in the wartime?
Yeah, I'll offer this. They were, when we're doing it, almost all of us have to feed a family and had real jobs. Some were fortunate to have real jobs in aviation, but it wasn't our sole purpose. The pilots flying these, they were professional pilots. They may not have many hours, but they didn't have many distractions, and the price of failure was to go drive a tank. So they were incentivized, and they also were brutally selected out to keep the good people. So I think the fact that you had 200-hour pilots going into combat is often looked at as saying, well, they didn't have much experience. Well, they didn't have a lot of flight hours, but those 200 hours were extraordinarily focused. And I think that's the big difference of being a sportsman and transitioning into the plane and being a young professional, where you wake up thinking about it, you go to bed thinking about it, and you're tested on how well you think.
I still though think back when I first flew the Mustang. I had over 2,000 hours in a Harvard, and these guys were 19 jumping into a Mustang or a Spitfire with maybe 40 hours in a Harvard. Just amazing what they did.
The mishap rate was not insignificant. I mean, they killed a lot of people with that process too. So that's another part.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I got the hook sign here, so I'm going to say, hey, happy birthday to the Royal Canadian Air Force, 100 years. We thank them for their support, we thank them for their airplanes, and we thank the gentlemen who have provided these airplanes for us. And I got to say to you guys, thank you so much for bringing them here and bringing us the story. This has been outstanding.
It's our honor. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you, folks.